to bring his work to all of you today. But first, a bit of information about today's Learning to Listen episode. Over 800 people have registered for today's webinar. It's great to see you all in the chat, so please do tell us who you are and where you're from and what you do there. Today, our wonderful interpreter, Maria Jose Gutierrez, joining us from Bogota, Colombia, will be simultaneously translating our webinar into Spanish. Thank you, Maria Jose. To access the translation, click on the interpretation icon in your Zoom controls. Then select Spanish. To mute the English in the background, select Mute Original Audio. La conversación de hoy será en español e inglés. En los controles de esa reunión, haga clic en Interpretación. Haga clic en el idioma que le gustaría escuchar. Para escuchar solo el español, haga clic en Silenciar Audio Original. We are also providing closed captions today for those who would like to use them. So to turn captioning on, please just click on the closed caption icon in your Zoom controls and select Show Subtitle. You can adjust the size of the subtitles. Please use the chat feature if you have a comment to share or need help with a technical issue. And please do put your questions, Professor Kahumoku, in the question and answer box. We will be pausing along the way to think with you about your questions. Now, we know many of you may be wondering about certificates of attendance. If you would like to receive a certificate of attendance for today's webinar, please be sure you complete the feedback survey. The survey will open in your web browser when this webinar ends. You will also receive a link to the survey tomorrow in a thank you email that will include the webinar recording as well as resources about today's conversation. The survey and webinar recording will be available in both English and Spanish. You can also access this recording and all of the other Learning to Listen recordings on our YouTube channel and our website. Before we begin, I want to thank our sponsors, the Burke Foundation and the Cambridge Trust, as well as our fabulous Brazelton Touchpoint Center production team, Isabella Manchija, Michael Accardi, and Suzanne Okasik. And now it's time to introduce today's guest, Dr. Walter Kahumoku III. Dr. Walter Kahumoku III is associate faculty at the College of Education at the University of Hawaii in Manoa, and was formerly executive assistant to the chancellor at the University of Hawaii in West Oahu, and the former director of the Kahohali Ki or Educator Professional Development Department of the Kamehameha Schools. A former school administrator, writing specialist, high school teacher, and director of forensics, Dr. Kahumoku has dedicated his life's work to improving the educational well-being of Hawaiian learners. His publications and presentations advocate for cultural, linguistic, and indigenous educational approaches that advance meaningful, relevant, rigorous, relationship-based, and responsibility-focused leading, teaching, and learning. He has over 30 years of experience in education, including teacher and administrator education, curriculum development, instructional strategies and assessment, professional development, and educational policy. As a visionary and architect of Native Hawaiian and Indigenous educational approaches and programs, Dr. Kahumoku is recognized and sought after locally, nationally, and internationally. As director of Kahohali Ki, he was the lead designer of Kahua, a teacher induction program, and Ho'okele, an administrator leadership program. He currently sits on the boards of Kuleana Oiwi, a Native Hawaiian Journal Board, and Hulili, multidisciplinary research on Hawaiian well-being. He is one of the contributing writers to the Honua Maori Ola Cultural Pathways, chaired a major section in the Nalau Lama report, as well as a writer and contributor to the creation and implementation of Nahoapina Au, culturally grounded learner outcomes, adopted statewide in 2016 by the Hawaii Department of Education. Professor Kahumoku, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me. Aloha kako, aloha kakahiaka kako. O wau o Walter Kahumoku, Hanao ka kununui o Manoa, College of Education. And I'm very happy to be here. And thank you very much to Josh and the crew for allowing me the space and time to be able to have this presentation and conversation with everyone. So aloha. It's still morning time, so I addressed you as aloha kakahiaka, or good morning, from Hawaii. So it's a good morning for us to be together. All right. What I would like to do today is to really talk through some ideas about where we have gone and where we are hopefully headed in terms of understanding the well-being of our children, of our Keiki in the islands, and especially our Native Hawaiian children. I'm going to jump to the next slide. This is a wonderful picture of my son, Walter Keiki Kahumoku IV. And he is an important part of our lives, of my wife and I. And he graduated 2 years ago from high school, and that's his, he was in a play as one of our ali'i, our kings, when he was younger. He represents a different generation of folks who are coming through our systems of education now, who stand on their own feet as both Native Hawaiian as well as a modern man, a modern person. And it's been quite a journey, because we have been under the auspices and unfortunately the thumbprints of colonization for the last 200 plus years. That colonization has decimated our population. When our first British sailors came onto one of our islands, they came with a number of diseases that we had no immunization for, and of course that rapidly spread. Over the course of the last, especially 200 years, up until 1980s, 1978, we were not actually allowed to teach through Hawaiian language. And so our ability to communicate in our mother tongue was really decreased, although luckily some of our families were able to hold on to them, to the ability to speak. Colonization has also removed us from our ancestral lands, our rights to our lands and our oceans, and at times it has been forcible. And then it has definitely influenced the way we see ourselves as Kānaka Hawaiʻi, as Native Hawaiians. So the impact of colonization on us has been quite immense and quite significant. Next slide, please. In terms of our educational status today, and this comes from 2022's information, latest information from the Department of Education, etc., about nearly a fourth of all students in our public schools are of Native Hawaiian ancestry. And unfortunately, it also means that while we have increased the total number of students, Native Hawaiian students, going into college, we're still far behind other ethnicities and other ethnic groups in attaining our bachelor degrees. It is also sad in the next slide that about a third of those retained, those who are not moving on to the next grade level, are Native Hawaiians. Fewer than a fourth of Native Hawaiian students in high school are in dual credit early college classes. In addition to that, chronic absenteeism, student suspensions, academic proficiencies and performance proficiencies in English, language arts, and math are not where we want them to be. And these are markers of what our, not just our public schools, but all schools in Hawaii are really evaluated for the ability to be able to move children along in positive ways. And we always wonder why are these indicators still there? They're still pretty prevalent amongst in our Native Hawaiian communities. Next slide, please. We, a number of researchers really have put our heart and souls in the last probably 30, 40 years to trying to reignite what it means to be Kānaka Hawaiʻi. And to do this, we're looking at ways to ground and reground our Hawaiian haumana in their indigeneity. We are looking to educate Native Hawaiians through our knowledge bases, our language, and our ways of being. So we alter the way we think about curriculum and instruction, assessment, and learning environments so that it includes and integrates teaching through traditional knowledges and language. And many of us have invested countless years in trying to empower Native Hawaiian students to advocate for our ways of knowing, believing, and being. And I think that has successfully helped us to move along, even though as a Native Hawaiian group and an Indigenous group in the United States, we are not federally recognized. So we don't always achieve all of the benefits of being federally recognized in terms of funding. Next slide, please. To ignite through Indigenous knowledge education, or IKE, is our some of our work, and especially my work, right? And I offer this definition for you. It just is a working definition at this point. We're trying to work on that and shape it so that we're trying to teach now through IKE the use of Indigenous Aboriginal tribal knowledges, the language, the practices, the cultural ways of being and believing and others as foundational to the way we teach and obviously the way in which our students learn. The goal is to create and sustain thriving, healthy, indigenously enriched learning environments to advance Native learners' well-being. And this is a critical aspect of the work we're doing now. And I have to say that this includes our folks who are doing work in our language medium approaches, our Olelo Hawaii medium approaches, Kaya Puni, which is language immersion, and Kaya Olelo, which is our Hawaiian language medium schools. It is in our Hawaiian focus charter schools. It is a way in which some of our public schools have embraced it, and certainly ways in which our independent schools, some of our big independent schools now are embracing as well. Next slide, please. What this means now is to develop a set of strategies that really change the way we think about curriculum, teaching, assessment and evaluation, the kinds of learning environments that we would love to see for our students. And then, in addition to that, the politics of being an Indigenous group in the middle of the 50th state of the Union. So I think these 5 areas are going to be very critical to the ways in which we look at the future of education for ourselves. The next slide indicates a little bit about some work that a good colleague of mine, Dr. Kamuela Young, at West Oahu is working on in terms of pre-calculus and calculus, the use of Hawaiian navigational processes to teach pre-calc and calculus. This is an advancement in what we're trying to hopefully encourage and what we have been working on in K-12 ed and preschool. So they're learning their numeracy through Hawaiian ways of thinking and knowing. And now this is developing into advanced work in math. Here, the following slides indicate just a little bit of some of the things that he's been doing with his students. He uses our compass, our moon kind of directional compass that has lau and kona. See, these are directional pieces, and he translates that into degrees on a compass situation, and you'll notice the formulaic pieces that are located around that. This helps our Native Hawaiians really attune now to the things that they know, and now to the things that they don't know, especially in pre-calculus, right? The next slide, please. What this happens then is he's able to teach our young Native Hawaiians the ability to do measurements, observations, and calculations utilizing this navigational process, this va'a process, this canoe process. And he's able to teach this math concept that really will help our kids not just be able to navigate the ocean, but to be able to get into fields like medicine, like science, like technology, like engineering, that really need this kind of background in math. What's been amazing on the next slide is that these kids now, these young men and women, are able to calculate using the symmetry found in the way our compass, our star compass, works. And they're able to now calculate using Hawaiian knowledge bases that they're pretty familiar with. And that is phenomenal, because whereas in the past, he said maybe about a third of all students passed the pre-calculus course, and maybe only a fourth would pass calculus 1. He's getting pretty high rates of not just completion of the course, but passing it with pretty high marks. He's batting about 82% of all his folks who are able to now navigate both pre-calculus and calculus 1. And of the 82%, right, the majority of them are Hawaiian. A first real brilliant piece that I think is going to be our future down the line, right? Now, what does that have to do with young folks, especially those who are in preschool? This process does not exist unless we are teaching through our Hawaiian language and our Hawaiian culture numeracy at the preschool level. So our babies are starting to learn what where Nalani is in the sky, where the moon rises and the sun then rises, the stars in the sky. So that by the time they get to be 17, 18, and 19-year-olds, they're working from a basis of knowledge that strengthens their understanding of who they are as Native Hawaiians and now can be adapted to math. I want to take a pause here because it's just one example. People are doing work in science, teaching chemistry this way. People are doing literary analyses, teaching 11th grade math, English this way. I want to pause right here because I think this is an important piece of how now the integration of Hawaiian knowledge all the way through from our young, really young babies all the way through to now these college-going students are working through our Hawaiian identity. I want to pause here to see if there's any questions or any comments or things, wonderings maybe?
I have a number of questions and wonderings, but I want to first bring to you a comment from the chat. I love how it starts at preschool. That's where a huge difference makes and all the way through. And I was wondering the same thing about the language immersion work. I know that the way in which the Hawaiian language is taught has really become a model for Indigenous languages around the world, and is highly sought after. So I wondered if you could talk a little bit about how early the language immersion learning starts and how that works.
We are lucky to say that we are probably in our third and fourth generations of Hawaiian language speakers in the home. And what I mean by that is these are second language speakers who learn language in schools and college and now are utilizing it as their primary language of communication at home. That's a long road to hoe because in the 1980 census, we only had about less than 2,000 Manaleo native speakers alive, many of whom were 70 plus years old and on the verge of passing on to the next, level. And we were in dire straits. We were very close to language extinction for ourselves. And so I lived in a house where my father was definitely a speaker of our language, but he refused to speak to my sister and I. He refused to use Hawaiian in the household. The only way we knew that he could speak was that when he would hop on the phone with his mother, all of a sudden a strange language suddenly appeared and we got to hear Hawaiian. And, it took us a while to actually realize he could speak Hawaiian, but it wasn't until his elder age years, and he had Alzheimer's. So he reverted back to speaking Hawaiian, and thank goodness I went to college to take some classes and I could understand him, although he would always scold me about my Hawaiian because it was book knowledge and not his kind of conversational Hawaiian. So we've come far. We're nearing almost 30,000 now folks who use Hawaiian as their first language, and the numbers are growing. And that has been because of the work that people have done in schools and now in communities, because now we have programs out in our communities who are teaching Olelo Hawaiʻi to community folks across the state. So there are active ways in which you can hop onto a program, an app, or you can come attend a community organization to learn Hawaiian, and it's been a really wonderful journey to see.
A lot of times people are intimidated, adults, about
Yes.
learning a new language. But I wonder about how this is happening. But my Hawaiian Native friends and colleagues who have varying degrees of Hawaiian language are all really enthusiastic and I think fairly fearless about learning, which isn't usually the case. There must be some kind of spirit about this being possible and within reach. And I just wonder how did that happen?
I think, and one of our folks online from Maui, Gina, just noted that she's very proud of being Hawaiian. I think that pride piece, that sense of real honor and respect and just the beauty of our language now has become a resonating factor for a lot of families, both here in the islands as well as across, because now we have more Native Hawaiians in the diaspora than we do here in the islands at home. That doesn't mean that they're not Native Hawaiian. What it means is the passion to learn and reconnect with what things are Hawaiian, especially in our language, that are found in our language. I think that's critical to our continued growth as a people.
There was a question asking if you could provide further explanation about the compass, and people are very excited about that.
Yeah. Yep.
Should we put the slide back up?
The star compass actually is available in multiple ways. If you hop online, go to the Polynesian Voyaging Society, you'll see a really great example of the star compass itself. The Bishop Museum also has a nice set of tutorial pieces around the star compass. Please, we're online everywhere. So luckily, it's quite accessible across the board now. And in addition to that, you can learn the star compass as a part of your learning of Olelo Hawaiʻi now as a part of a training piece or I think our preschools now have it as a part of a tutorial piece for families and for communities. So lots of ways to know it.
So another question that I had was about indigegogy, and um, is a great word, and just wondering about the actual practice of teaching and what that process is, what the interaction is like between the learners and the teachers. And the teachers are, I'm guessing, not just other humans, but probably our plant and animal relatives and the earth and the wind and the water too. So how does that learning happen? Because some of us may have this sort of Euro-American idea of sort of the one-way transmission of knowledge, and I'm sure that that's not it.
Yeah, yeah. Um, I'm going to cover that in the next set of
Oh, good.
slides.
So should we go there?
So it might be a really great segue into the next set of slides.
Okay, great.
That might be great. So one of my dearest, more like family members now, is Dr. Keiki Kawaiʻi. She is out of the University of Hawaii at Hilo, known for her work in teacher education, known for her work in supporting Hawaiian culture-based education, and really being one of the front runners in the ways we change the way we think about teaching and learning. So I'm going to present this piece called Moenaha. She comes from her work, and Moenaha is around a natural learning cycle. It is really geared toward understanding these natural learning questions and really phases of approach that our ancestors, our kupuna, used to be able to teach the young folks and to grow, knowledgeable young folks as well. The next slide indicates the phases that she talks about in the Lau Kukui. This is a process of teaching that is indicative of indigegogy. We prepare our students for the learning process through ho'olohe, by allowing them an opportunity to sense, to smell, to observe, to touch, right? To connect with. And then that really draws them in and it answers the question, why am I learning this? Right? If we don't prepare our learners to learn, if we just simply say, okay, class, we're going to turn to page 237 and start with this quadratic equation, chances are our students are probably going to look at you and look at me and probably say, no, thank you, and go do some other things and become disruptive. So we really emphasize a way to prep and prepare our young folks for the learning process. This is very indicative of the way in which my grandmother instructed me and my grandfather instructed me. Then the next piece is about ho'opili, is understanding and knowing. If you can slide back to the previous one. Perfect. Okay, so ho'opili is to understand the actual learning pieces that we want to. If this is math and quadratic equation, we're going to break that apart. We're going to show them how to do it. We're going to say why that these pieces actually work together and then allow them to really learn and understand this. This is a typical piece that most teachers will do anyway, learning the skills and the knowledge. In addition to that, we move over then to ho'ohana. This is experiential learning at its best. This is the ways in which we allow our kids to be able to apply the learning, to learn the skills. This is also a place where we measure whether or not they're capable of doing these pieces. And if not, we've got to go back to training them in different ways so that we can strengthen their understanding of what they're trying to learn. But there's another step in this process that was an expectation of our elders, and that is ho'opuka, the ability to be able to take the learning and apply it in some way to some sort of critical good for the community or for families. this approach now, these four quadrants, if you will, these approaches make up the Moanaha framework for teaching and learning. And they're important parts of it because we don't always do that ho'opuka piece, that culminating piece that showcases the learning of what they are doing. Today, we're trying to incorporate these, especially you'll see this in preschools when the little ones stand up and they sing, they craft and create things, and they show and tell. You'll see the little ones perform what we call hula, or a dance of some sort. These pieces are what the little ones can do, and you can imagine then this goes all the way straight through to when they're in college and they're starting to present these major learnings or applied learnings on behalf of the well-being of their community. So they're attending to community issues and they're trying to resolve those community issues. So this is this Moanaha process is a really wonderful example of indigegaji. On the next slide, this is our calendar based on our moon process. It's the application of the different phases of the moon and how that impacts the ways in which our tides rise and fall. It also impacts the ways we think about planting crops. Different kinds of crops need different kinds of moon phases because of the water table and the soil. These are all pieces that are applied now in ways that can strengthen our understanding of traditional practices as applied to a modern world. Yep. And my household is definitely practicing this moon cycled process. We clean the house a certain time period of the moon calendar. We go out into the yard and work in the yard in connection to this. We even have gatherings at the house that are appropriate to these moon phases. So I think these are great. This is a great example of indigegaji and applied indigegaji. Yeah, so maybe that answered that question. I'm going to move to the next section, which is assessment. And I'm going to talk a little bit of this relational assessment piece that's grounded in who we are as Native Hawaiians. I call it Kaikua'ana Kaikaina, the older sibling and the younger sibling. And it's a way for us to guide the work of younger children by utilizing the wisdom and knowledge bases of our older children. However, it does require that we train our older kids to take on this kind of kuleana, this kind of responsibility. And it really ties us together in terms of family relationships at the school level. So you're utilizing an older sibling and a younger sibling, older sibling to care and help teach the younger siblings. The younger siblings then begin understanding what respect is, how to act and react with the older siblings, right? We don't allow, obviously, physical punishment because that's not an appropriate part of our culture. So this is a wonderful way to utilize our cultural concepts in the way to assess growth. And this is how it works. On the next slide, you'll see an assessment tool. And I borrowed this directly from a project I was working with one of the charter schools. This is grade 4. The major idea of that year is about sense of responsibility. You'll notice this is a template or a rubric for judging the growth of writing skills and knowledge. But it's slightly different, utilizing a Hawaiian way of thinking about how to assess success. And if you notice at the top portion of it, there's needing much support, but on the very far right side of it, that high degree of excellence is based on a child's ability to teach others. Not that they're performing at measures that are, say, grade 5 or grade 6, or grade 7, which is very individualistic. This rubric is based on that child's ability to then teach others the skill sets that they have mastered. Yeah. And of course, mastery is at this level, is really up to the teacher, but we have children who will excel in certain things. They then become teacher aides to help those who are struggling grow in their skills and knowledge bases. In addition to that, it also means that these folks who take on this kind of extra responsibility for others really get a sense of aloha and care. That's so important in a classroom, right? That everyone cares for each other. What our teachers are telling us is that things like fighting, arguments, stealing, this sense of ownership, singular ownership versus a collective good, starts to disappear because these kids who are really good in a certain thing are teaching others to be good in that thing too. And then that relationship gets strengthened through that. So they're not apt to steal from that child. They're not apt to hit the child or tease the child or bully the child. They're more apt to help their colleague, their friend, their classmate to become better at what they're doing. They're doing really well. So this is a sample of how assessment now changes its viewpoint about what success looks like and feels like. Yep. In the next rubric, you'll see that same design, ready to teach others, right? And this one is in what we call ho'opuka, right? That piece that comes from the moenaha process. And this is where we get to see applied learning at its best. That kids really help each other to present and to be at the very best of what they can do together as a collective. You'll see that the same kinds of requirements for growth and learning that normal schools will go through, in this way, seems to turn it slightly so that we're now including Hawaiian ways of being and knowing and understanding. Yep. So that we're presenting pieces in the ho'opuka now that are good for not just the classroom, but maybe for the school, maybe for the wider community and families that are out there. So these projects that these kids are doing are really about developing themselves in ways to lend to not only the growth of the folks in their classroom, but now what they can do on behalf of the schools and even communities that are out there. In the following slide, you'll see a sample of disposition that changes. So in a rubric like this, right, these are words that are used by these teachers, right? These are things that, I was in the classroom for many years. These are things that we would have wanted, and we probably preached. I certainly told my high school students that this is important to me, but never designed in a rubric that really looks at ways that people help each other become stronger, right? Come into the learning situation with open hearts and open minds. The ability to be resilient through stick-to-itiveness, the ability to keep moving forward even when things are tough, are challenging, right? Barriers that they face, right? And you notice at the very end, the dispositional change now to service to others. That's a big step in our process, especially when so many of our Native Hawaiian young have been taught very well to be very individualistic in their approach to everything, including learning. So this is something that our teachers now are trying to employ as a part of an ongoing effort to change the disposition of our Native Hawaiians back to something that's much more grounded in Kānaka Hawaiʻi. Okay, so we're going to pause there because I covered both, instructional changes, pedagogical changes through indigedagogy, and then now assessment, even disposition that's changed, and see if there are any questions.
There are lots of comments. There was one question about how you would recommend teaching a child currently 17 months who is part of the Hawaiian diaspora the language, and this family doesn't live on the island. So I wanted to be sure to bring that to you because it sounds like it's felt so passionately.
Yeah, now you can access, like, for example, our preschools, our Punana Leo preschools have some pretty wonderful tools that you can use, even if you live away. There's a program out in, oh gosh, at Windward Community College. Sorry, that was a little hiccup. That also encourages this type of learning and processing. They have a certificate and an associate's degree now in Hawaiian ways of knowing and believing. Hawaii Community College, as well as the University of Hawaii at Hilo, also has a program piece that you can tap into. There are actually a bunch of different programs you can jump into and learn, and you can learn right alongside with your child. Start with words, work up to sentences, then work on to just speaking with children. And the earlier you start, by the way, the better, because your children will get grounded in Olelo Hawaii. And then you get a chance to connect with your child on a wholly different level. I walked into Safeway with my 19, soon to be 20-year-old, and it is wonderful to be able to talk to him only in Hawaiian, and he be able to respond to me in little ways, because he's had 3 years of Hawaiian, but not quite getting grasped in it. But it's all good. I never knock him for the type of words he uses or even the sentence patterns, because I want to encourage him to be able to use Hawaiian, feel comfortable about using Hawaiian. And then, as he listens, right, even the pronunciation, as he listens to myself or others, his aunties, whomever speaking in Hawaiian, he'll start picking it up. The ear will become attuned to it. So I hope I answered the question.
That was a wonderful answer. And I'm thinking about how encouraging you were of me when I was asking you before we began about how to pronounce the many words in Hawaiian that were a part of introducing you. I just wanted to note that we had a comment from a friend in Muckleshoot lands who said Olelo Hawaii is the act of reclaiming the Hawaiian language and exercising the
Olole.
right. Yeah.
Yes, 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 yes.
So I just wanted to make sure to touch on that. And then there's one comment about uh, how this person could see educators at any level modifying or adapting curriculum to include cultural practices from various cultures represented in the classroom. And it had me wondering as I was listening to you about how what I think you talked about, and this is as a non-Indigenous person, it's to me it seems like it is inseparable from a way of knowing and a way of being. That there is this really central value, for example, of being in service of others and of having responsibility towards others. And so I'm wondering what you might say about um, how the cultural practices and knowledge, need to come from, reinforce, and be connected to a way of being, and if maybe there's a way in which, in this indigedagogy, you are supporting the becoming of this way of being.
Yep. I'm from the standpoint that all Native peoples across the world have some kind of environmental connection, right? Their ability to sense and understand the environment that they live in and that they come from is super important to themselves. In speaking with just various groups from across the country, And they are definitely in tune with their own lands and their own sense of the environment around those lands, which is really critical. And what's hard for some folks who are away from that is that reconnect. Yep, I was in on another island in Hilo this last week, and it's just wonderful to be able to hear Hawaiian language being used. They use it in a certain way that is dialectically their own, right? And I have to honor the fact that some of that just went right past me. The same thing holds true when I'm talking with people from another part of the state who are who have a different dialectical way of pronouncing things. And just like for me, because my father grew up in Kohala, so there are certain ways in which to do that. Reconnecting with each folk, right, from wherever they are at, is going to be a critical part of our own growth. And for non-natives who want to adopt some of the things that they're hearing now into their practice, it would be critical to connect with people from that area who they're trying to serve, right? From the students who are maybe are working in Seattle, and you have a number of folks from Alaska, from different parts of the country who are in Seattle in a classroom situation, and that teacher really wants to understand and know how to best connect with, right? The other part of the equation is that for non-natives, allyship is super important, right? Connecting, and then more importantly, respecting and honoring. Whatever the child's background, wherever the child is from, respecting and honoring that child's background. Sure, we may not understand it. We may not. I had a wonderful Inuit grandmother who sat next to me at a ceremony, and she offered, as traditional practice, they offered whale blubber as a part of your eating process in this traditional ceremonial kind of piece. And she watched me intently because she knew that I don't have an acclimation to whale blubber, and I did not. And it was an interesting taste. I tried not to actually taste it, but just put it down the throat. And they offer no water, nothing to drink. You just had to eat it. And she had a good laugh on my behalf. And a little later, and I whispered to her and I said, "Hey, so when you come to Hawaii, I'll feed you some of our traditional things and see how you like it." She just continued to have a great time about it. But that's an important part of this process, right? Learning how to and being on and honoring and be very respectful of those people from that place. And as children sitting in your classroom, that's going to be a tough road, but yet a really valuable road. The kids will always appreciate that. Are there other questions before I move on?
I think it would be great for you to bring us around the
Okay.
bend.
All right, let's
Yeah.
do it. Okay, so just got a couple pieces left. As I was noting just momentarily ago, that classroom and learning environment is so critical to our success. And we believe that our grounding, our sense of being, our mauli, our connectivity, our mauliola, our well-being is definitely connected to our environments around us, whether or not that be down at the beach, the kahakai, out in the moana, the ocean, out here in a lo'i patch, or in the awai next to the lo'i. All of these things are super important to us, and we found ways to teach math, English, social studies, and science through these classroom learning environments. We take them outside as many times as we possibly can. We've also realized for students that it is this process of engaged classroom environments that seems to draw the kids in, energize them through exploration and investigation, and fill them with enthusiasm to learn. It's a far cry from where we are probably about 50 years ago, where kids were just dropping out, especially our boys. We would start losing them around that 8th to 10th grade corridor, especially in my area. We were losing about a fourth of our boys because school was just not for them, right? So I think this change in learning environment has been very critical to the way in which we teach our kids, the way in which we draw them in and make connections to it. The next slide talks a little bit about what one charter school is doing, Kawaihona o Kana'awau, with dispositions. They now use these dispositional pieces all the way through the year. They've charted it. This is what they're going to focus in on. I think that's going to be really key to the ways in which the kids see this continuity of learning all the way through. So you can imagine this is only until 8th grade, that by the time they roll through high school and into college, they have these imprints of Hawaiian understandings, these Hawaiian values that are going to be key to their identity as Kānaka Hawaiʻi. I want to move to the last piece, which is politics. I've had many a teacher who tells me, well, I don't teach activism and political advocacy. That's just not the thing that I do in my classroom. I want my kids to be able to embrace who they are and know who they are without me imposing on them political views. This is different from that. We are trying to encourage our teachers to grow our students in ways that allow them to really put themselves forward, and put themselves forward in terms of themselves individually, in terms of themselves connected to their school and the people in the school, themselves connected and very critically honoring their families, and then themselves in terms of the wider community. Because so much has been taken away, so much needs to be fought for. And in a conversation I had on Friday with a group of young folks about where we have come from, they didn't understand that teaching through Hawaiian in Kaiapuni language immersion schools or Kaya Olelo language medium schools didn't exist at one time. That even if it's been 30 years since we've had our doors open for our first language immersion schools in kindergarten through grade 5, and now all the way through the entire system, because you can go through preschool and then graduate with a doctorate's degree now by just purely speaking Hawaiian. Of course, you have to also speak other languages like English. That all of that never had a history, and yet it does. It's because I think folks like myself and others, right, have been right on the front line trying to advocate for, trying to, in many ways, become activists for this kind of growth as far as Kānaka Hawaiʻi and Lahui Hawaiʻi. Lahui meaning the nation of Hawaii, right? And this sense of aloha especially that permeates throughout the islands, whether or not you're Hawaiian or Japanese or Chinese or whatever the ethnicity, is something we need to hold on to, and sometimes vigorously hold on to that. So these pictures that we help our kids understand are really going to be in the types of projects that they work on, that they're going to apply their learning in ways that help their families and communities become well or strengthen their wellness. That's an important part of the politics of all of this, right? So the ways in which we do this are in the next slide on advocacy. We now help our kids, whether or not they're very young in elementary school, all the way straight through college, understand through research. These kids are now conducting research, historic research, actual survey research, you name it. The types of things that can understand at a much broader and deeper way things that have happened to us and ways in which we can now envision a much more viable and proud future for all people of Hawaii. We do problem solutions assignments. We have a large number of houseless folks on on this island's west coast, right? Now we see projects both at elementary, middle, and high school, as well as college, that go out to help our homeless, in different ways, right? We see now the importance of aloha aina and protecting the conservation of our lands, of our rainforests, our plant and agricultural areas, of our water, access to our water. That's the type of advocacy pieces and many more that we're starting to see as projects from our students. The activism slide, which is next, we now see way more folks out on the line, voicing, giving voice to ways in which we can work harder to help our all folks in Hawaii, and especially Native Hawaiians, understand how to strengthen all people in Hawaii. Yep. And that through this process of strengthening, we empower people now to push forward identity, integrity, and our sovereignty as a nation. Yeah. And these are important pieces for all of us. So I think I want to close at this point with the PowerPoint with just saying we have a lot of hope for our future. We've come a long way thus far, and there's a lot of work still left, but we're ready to go.
Mahalo, Professor Kahumoku. What a perfect place to bring us to, from learning and being to acting, so that we continue to learn and to be. And thank you all for joining us today. Please do come back again on Wednesday, April 17th, for our next Learning to Listen episode on explaining racial disparities in health with the fabulous Professor Kiara Bridges, anthropologist and attorney and professor of law at the University of California, Berkeley School of Law. Thank you for joining us. Be well, and we'll see you again soon.